What if I told you this simple toy dispensing machine in Japan turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry? Sounds crazy, right? But that simple capsule dispenser inspired loot boxes, the digital mystery boxes inside video games that players buy or earn to unlock random rewards. And this microtransaction system made game companies billions. So in this episode, we unlock how loot boxes became one of the most powerful and controversial money machines in modern gaming. And once you see how deep this goes, you'll never look at games the same way again. Let's tear into it. Loot boxes didn't just appear out of nowhere. They have a very specific origin and actually had nothing to do with gaming. They came from Japan, specifically from these toy vending machines called gachapon. The gachapon came out in 1965 and are still a hit in Japan today. You put in a coin, twist a dial, and out pops a random toy in a plastic capsule. Each toy is typically a part of a larger set, and getting one is a matter of chance. Kids and adults alike love it, and you could find YouTube videos with millions of plays, with people just going to gachapon stores and opening capsules. And with all of this success, game developers took notes. The first game to really take advantage of the success of the gachapon machine was MapleStory in 2003. In-game, you could buy gachapon tickets, and it works exactly like the real ones in Japan. But this was all done digitally. You insert your ticket into the machine and you get a random item for your character. Now, surprisingly, the Western world didn't take advantage of loot boxes for a while. But 7 years later, Team Fortress 2 was born, and the developers at Valve saw the vision. They added crates that could only be opened with keys that you had to buy. This became so successful that to get more players to play Team Fortress 2, they actually made the game free. And with the barrier to enter the game completely removed, the player base literally increased 12 times over. So money was no longer made from the initial purchase of the game. The money came trickling in long after the release date, all thanks to loot boxes. This is what I found shocking when I was researching this, but on average, most people weren't spending really much at all on loot boxes. According to a statistic done by libraryhbs.edu, 90% of the revenue made off loot boxes came from whales. Not from these whales, but these whales. These people are willing to spend ridiculous amounts of money on in-game items. So the hunt for developers to snare these whales continued, and developers across the world began to follow in Valve's footsteps. And then came the avalanche. Practically every game implemented some version of loot boxes into their game. Facebook's Farmville, League of Legends, these were some of the early adopters of utilizing loot boxes. And then to go back to the developers at Valve, they even doubled down with their game Counter-Strike 2, and they created one of the biggest skin economies that actually just crashed recently in October 22nd, 2025, where over $4.2 billion were wiped from the game. Now, not to get into the nitty-gritty of what happened here, but essentially what happened was developers made it easier to get expensive skins, which then tanked the rarity of some of the most expensive digital assets. Which, just like the real stock market, this completely devalued all of these assets, and there was a huge market crash. And this is real money. This isn't like fake money. This is real $4.2 billion. But Valve wasn't the only one making money off these boxes. The World of Warcraft devs over at Blizzard created Overwatch, and this game seemingly was made from the ground up to feature loot boxes. Had character skins, sprays, and emotes, and they had these flashy box animations. And the cool thing about Overwatch is that you can actually get a lot of boxes for free just by playing the game. And I feel like this is one of the very few examples where loot boxes were done right. The balance between playing the game to get boxes, and then if you just wanted some more boxes, you could pay for it. No big deal. I feel like during this time period, things were good. But this actually didn't last long, because soon after it devolved into the type of greed that you hear about in the Bible. And once Overwatch 2 came out, it's a whole story for a different day. At this point, loot boxes weren't just a feature, they became the core revenue engines for games. So much so that a lot of games started going the free-to-play route, making games cost nothing to play, but to open loot boxes or progress quickly in the game, get extra lives, or whatever it is, you need to have a credit card. So let's break down loot boxes, because at this point, loot boxes start varying a bit from game to game. And developers tried some different options to rake in the most money depending on which type of game that they had. So let's break down what the two types of loot boxes are and how each of them play into our psychology. The first one is probably the most common, and that's cosmetic loot boxes. Think flashy skins or cool character designs, the type of thing that doesn't typically affect the game but just shows off to other players. Now there's a couple of mechanisms at play here. First, buying these skins is a way to express yourself in game, to differentiate yourself from other players. And second, you're kind of flexing to other players, showing off the cool thing that you just got. To make it even more addicting, skins typically have a rarity tiered system, meaning you can get a basic loot, which is like a gray colored thing, or you get the legendary loot with the flashy colors, kind of reminiscent of what you would see at a casino, making your skin more desirable than others. And this is an oversimplification of why these boxes are so successful. Developers utilize a whole bunch of psychology to get you to buy, like discounts, holiday skins, flashy store menus, expiring skins. This all really creates FOMO, the fear of missing out, to hopefully get you to get your credit card and get some digital swag. So we have cosmetic loot boxes, and then we have the second type of loot box, which I will call the fundamental boxes. These, in some way, shape, or form, affect the game. Think of something that gives you better stats or a leg up against other players, or something that just lets you skip having to play a lot of time into a game. I have a deep hatred for these type of boxes, especially when they're pay to win mechanics, but people are willing to pay for it, and if they do, they'll get a huge leg up over everybody, specifically if it's a multiplayer game. And that alone is worth a lot for people to buy. But that being said, loot boxes are unarguably one of the most controversial features in modern gaming. I think many players see them as anti-consumer, specifically when they're added to full-priced $70 games. Some journalists argue that loot boxes are just a way for studios to cover the ongoing cost of running online games. But when they show up in single-player titles, it starts to feel less like a maintenance thing and more like pure profit. From the publisher side, the story is completely different. They claim loot boxes are necessary to keep big budget AAA games financially viable. Game prices have hovered around $60 for years, even since I was a kid, and I'm getting old. I got a lot of gray hairs now. But even with development costs skyrocketing, instead of raising prices and scaring off buyers, publishers turned to post-release monetization like DLC, cosmetics, and loot boxes. And this keeps the money flowing long after launch. It's a way of surviving in a market dominated by free-to-play mobile games, where microtransactions are the norm. Analysts even argue that hour for hour, video games are still more valuable than most other forms of entertainment, even with loot boxes included, which are also completely optional for the most part. Some believe that loot boxes can fit naturally into games, kind of like Overwatch 1, and if done ethically, it could actually be kind of a cool thing. But when they're just built purely on profit just to squeeze cash from players, the game itself can suffer. Sort of like Battlefront 2, if any of you guys have played that game, they had a star card system. And the star card system wasn't just skins. These star cards would affect how much damage you would do, how much damage you could take, and it would affect a lot of other things. And this was a multiplayer game, so if you paid money, you could have a leg up over the opponent, which is completely unfair for competitive type shooters. And this received huge player backlash. You could get these star cards in-game for free, but if you did that route just from gameplay alone, it would take thousands of hours. I think they calculated it here, how much it would take. But anyways, I digress. This obviously breaks the consumer's trust. And interestingly, these systems are far more accepted in non-Western markets, which I actually found surprising, and among younger audiences who specifically grew up with mobile and free-to-play games. Because typically they have some sort of loot box system or some sort of monetization despite it being free. But now I want to shift gears and dive into the darker side of the loot box world, because doesn't this look familiar? The flashy colors, the sounds, the emotion it makes you feel, it's gambling.
See, it's not always gonna be dupes. Hey, we get 2 legendaries in one.
Loot boxes make money because it's essentially gambling. You're not paying because you know what you're gonna get. You're paying for the rush that you might get something cool from this random box that you paid money for. And you're not buying the item, you're buying a chance at something valuable, or digitally valuable. That vagueness is the same core mechanic behind slot machines. They also use variable ratio rewards, meaning you don't get something good every time. This keeps things feeling random and fresh. You just keep chasing that next hit, thinking the next dope skin might be in that next box, so I better buy another one. And another tactic that these developers use is indirect currencies. This makes you feel like you aren't spending real money. It's sort of like the casinos, really. I mean, this is exactly like casinos. At a casino, you have chips, and in games, you have gems or coins. It's a step between you and real money. And just like slot machines, they use sensory reinforcement, bright colors, sound effects, and rarity tiers. So your brain learns that these certain colors mean excitement even before you see what you got in the box. The visuals are part of the reward loop. So even if loot boxes don't pay out cash, the psychology is the same. They're built to keep you spending. Now here's where things get sticky, and I think we could all agree that kids gambling is bad. And very clearly, they are participating in what is essentially gambling light, the mini version of gambling, okay? Studies have shown that teens who spend money on loot boxes are significantly more likely to develop problems with gambling habits later in life. Research also shows that brains under the age of 25 are still developing, especially the part that controls impulse control and the ability to foresee consequence. Now this sounds a little too convenient for game developers who are looking for a quick buck. And lastly, these systems teach a repeated pattern. Spend money, maybe win, and repeat. That's a classic addictive loop, specifically the one responsible for gambling. So what seems like a harmless, just a game purchase can set the stage for gambling problems later down the road. And all this can pretty much be done behind their parents' backs, since I think a lot of parents don't dive into the nitty-gritty of what type of games their kids are playing. And even if the game seems innocent, there may be a darker side that you just haven't seen yet. But you'll probably find out soon once your kids start asking for your credit card. I actually found this 40-minute long YouTube video, which is just a compilation of kids stealing their parents' credit card to go buy loot boxes or in-game content.
Spend on my card. I'm actually going on my bank right now. You spent $1,000, bro. Is that true?
And I'm sure this only scratches the surface because I found tons of forums and online threads of parents asking, what do I do? My kid keeps stealing my credit card or asking me for money to buy in-game content. And this behavior is honestly pretty dark. When kids are conditioned to participate in gambling at such a young age, even in virtual form, it really raises the risk of real-world consequences from gambling addictions or, I'm sure, countless other things. I think we could all agree this probably isn't good. To address these practices worldwide, a number of countries have actually stepped in to treat loot boxes as gambling, or at least regulate them heavily. For example, in Belgium and the Netherlands, they found loot boxes to fall under the gambling laws because you pay real currencies for a chance at winning a random prize. In China, loot boxes have been regulated so that developers must disclose the odds of winning, and they also limit how many you can open. And on top of that, they ensure that prizes actually have in-game value rather than real-world trading value. And in contrast to here in the US, there's actually no federal laws that universally treat loot boxes as gambling. In many legal cases, courts have even found that in-game items don't necessarily count as something of value. And under state gambling laws, this makes prosecution or regulation very difficult. This means that game makers can continue to include loot boxes in US products, subject only to voluntary disclosure. But I think recently we've actually seen a new trend, a trend away from loot boxes. Many games are doing something different, and it's actually not loot boxes at all. And I'm not sure if this is because of regulation in other countries, but it's just in-game stores with cosmetic items or in-game boost. It means you know exactly what you're going to get. You see the skin, you buy it, you know you're getting that one. It's done, right? It's not some random thing in a box. So this solves the gambling issue, which makes this monetization strategy legal everywhere. And in 2025, games like Call of Duty and Ark Raiders have seasons to unlock new skins. So you could, find your specific skin you like and buy it. And then after your season is over, you can no longer buy that skin anymore. So that still creates FOMO for those old skins. I'm actually kind of curious how much this will cut into developers' bottom line. Although I say developers, but I mean just like the whole game industry as a whole. But only time will tell. So in the end, loot boxes didn't start as something evil. They came from something simple and fun, a toy machine in Japan. But when the gaming industry realized how profitable that feeling of chance was, that idea sealed into a multi-billion-dollar industry, one that changed how games are designed forever. And at this specific time in history, I think it's safe to say we all need to take a step back and really ask ourselves, do we need this skin? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.